We welcome you in, everybody, to another installment of Fielding the 68, brought to you by Rhythm here on Field the 68. I'm Faxon Childress alongside Lukas, Harkins, and Rocco Miller. We're going to have a blast today, ladies and gentlemen, because this is one of the most chaotic weekends of college hoops that I can remember in recent memory that we're coming off of. 9+ ranked opponents losing. It felt like almost everyone in the top 10 lost. So we're going to do our best to siphon through everything and figure out who's on the bubble and who's on the one line, as we always do. Fellas, appreciate you guys joining us as always. And Rocco, we'll rip the Band-Aid off and get started with you first. Talk to me a little bit about the biggest winner of the weekend, with so much to unpack in just an hour here today on the program.
Sure, I would go with the biggest winner, especially at the top of the board. From where I'm sitting, is the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Obviously a chaotic game down in the Frittata Center. But the Red Raiders became the first team to win at Houston this year, probably the first team in a long while from my recollection. And it was chaotic how it happened, but they got the big win. And they also got a little bit of an improvement as well because they beat BYU earlier this year. Just a sneak preview, BYU will be in my field today. So now they went from no wins on the road against a tournament-level team to a very high-end, one of the best road wins money can buy, and another one that just kind of blossomed over, due to BYU success. And so things look a lot prettier here this morning for the Red Raiders than before. They've had strong performance numbers throughout the season. This kind of reinforced it with the resume evidence we've been looking for. So they shot up to a 3 seed for me. And then the other one I was going to mention was Missouri. Missouri, of course, just absolutely hammered Mississippi State down in Starkville, something I think that caught many by surprise. Now Missouri, they're in an interesting spot. They've got 2 massive road wins at Mississippi State, at Florida, that are very heavy and gold-level road wins, but still just 2-4 on the road. That, for me, prevented them from getting all the way up into the top 4 protected seed area. But they're very close to that. They're obviously playing very well right now. And with Missouri sitting in the 6-7 range last week, they still took a significant jump. So I'll go ahead and give those 2 my big prizes today.
And Lukas, now throwing things to you. Who would you quantify as the biggest winners of this past weekend?
Yeah, I mean, he hits on the big ones. And I'd add UConn to the mix as well. A nice win there against Marquette. You kind of see a team like Arkansas even creeping up towards the field. I think they're still on the outside looking in, but a team that's in the mix. But I think Rocco hits on the big ones there. A quiet one that I'll say, it wasn't an earth-shaking win over the weekend for Texas A&M over South Carolina, but they kind of just keep rising as other teams have lost. Other top teams have lost. Texas A&M's won 4 or 5. They're up to about a 3 seed for me right now, and I think they're a team that's kind of quietly moving up while a bunch of other teams towards the top, as you referenced earlier, a big week of ranked teams losing.
Yeah, and Lukas, sticking with you, obviously we had a lot of people who had their stock rise this past weekend, but we also had some droppers. Who would you say are some of the biggest losers of this past weekend?
Well, I think it's hard to talk about the Missouri win without looking at the flip side of that in Mississippi State's loss, especially when you look at the metric difference that comes down to. It's a 27-point home loss. That's a drop just on KenPom from 25 to 33. Mississippi State was kind of a team that I was thinking had some protected seed level potential. Now they're just 2-5 over their last 7. The wins there are overtime wins over Mississippi and South Carolina that didn't do a whole lot for their metrics either. They're a team that is dropping down more towards a 6-7 range for me right now. But that's a loss to a tournament team. I can't say the same thing about Louisville, who lost on the road to Georgia Tech. That's a team that's kind of, I thought, was considering a jump towards that 4 seed range, but I had them as a 5 coming into the weekend, and they dropped a little bit from there with a non-tournament loss.
Yeah, and Rocco, throwing things to you on losers of this past weekend. Obviously, Pat Kelsey's group sticks out. They stepped on the landmine, if you will, down in Atlanta. And we know the quality of the ACC, especially towards the bottom of the league, is nowhere near as high as it typically is. And just an unfortunate fate for Louisville this past weekend.
Yeah, Lukas hit it beautifully there. Those were the top 2 I had on my list. I think with Mississippi State and Louisville. I think in Louisville's case, the unfortunate side of this, this awesome turnaround they've had under Pat Kelsey is they were still dealt a last place ACC schedule from their results last year. And so their foundation is very shaky. It's built on quicksand. due to the fact that they're playing the last place schedule. So there's not much they can do to continue to improve on the resume side. They just have to hold serve in all these games, and it's human nature to go lose on the road. Damon Stoudemire did, and the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets did this to like 4 or 5 tournament teams last year, and here we go again. And from Louisville's standpoint, they're just getting compared to a lot of really solid teams in that 6 through 9 range seed-wise. So they fell quite a bit due to that loss and really not having the strong foundation. Their best road wins at Pitt, who's a bubble team. Their best neutral court win is West Virginia, who's in the 8-9 range themselves. So it's not as strong as some of these others around them. And then I would say on the bubble side, Faxon, I'm out here in Arizona, so I'll mention Arizona State. They were barely in at the end of last week. That loss at home to Arizona, obviously a tough game and a super crazy ending. But at the end of the day, it's their ninth loss, and right now the losses are just outweighing the good wins they have. The good news for the Sun Devils is they still have a lot of opportunities in front of them, so they'll be able to play their way back in if they can find their success. And then the other one that was really just a team I'm not sure if they would have ever gotten inside the bubble. I would hope they would have a chance. They were playing really well. Is North Texas, and they take a home loss to UTSA. I know down there in Texas, those coaches, Austin Claunch and Ross Hodge, know each other well. Claunch came with a great game plan. And for North Texas, it's a home loss they couldn't afford. And we'll probably not see North Texas really in the at-large picture from here, unfortunately.
Yeah, and Rocco, sticking with you, you mentioned a couple of the bubble teams, and obviously you got the cool experience being out in Tempe this week. We were talking a little bit off the air beforehand. I did want to talk with the 1 seed talk right around the corner here in this first segment, a little bit about Iowa State, because for me personally, that was one of the most shocking results of the entire season. Not just a loss to Kansas State, but a 19-point loss to Kansas State, who is seemingly starting to turn things around a little bit with their super expensive roster. Talk me through what happened in Ames and how to really just even spell it out logically for what happened. I don't know if anyone saw this one coming.
Well, I think you have to go back to last Monday. We saw the crazy ending down here in Arizona with Iowa State, Arizona, and just a shocking loss for the Cyclones from their perspective. They had that thing won, and obviously we saw what happened. 60-foot shot, get owned in overtime. You have to feel like some of that carried over into this performance. They're almost always dominant in Hilton. Then on the flip side, you have Kansas State, who does have a load of talent. They've been pretty disappointing throughout the year, but in the last week, they went to Oklahoma State and destroyed the Cowboys, and of course had this performance. So a very dangerous, like under 500 team to be playing when they're feeling it and they're connected. Maybe Kansas State will be this year's NC State. Who knows? But in reality, Iowa State is now dealing with a bad loss, and everybody they're being compared against does not really have one. They're the only team really on the top 8 or 9 of my board with a subpar loss with that home Kansas State. So that's making it very clear they can't be really in the 1 seed consideration for today. They fell to just 6th overall. So from that perspective, they're okay. They're a safe 2. But I think you can make an argument to argue them down to maybe 7th or 8th overall, but that's still a 2 seed. So it's not the world's on fire or anything. They just got to find their footing and figure out what happened last week and get back to their old self.
And Lukas, to keep the theme consistent, I want to stay in the top 10 with a team that lost to an unranked opponent. It felt like there was some upward mobility on the seed lines for Tom Izzo's group. They go on the road to Los Angeles, and Bus is continuing to roll. USC is quietly starting to sneak back into the NCAA tournament picture. Talk to me a little bit about that big matchup in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think that you hit on the head with USC kind of getting themselves back into position. And that comes with what is, I think, I was planning on hitting on it later in the show, and that is maybe the most important week of any team in the country coming up on the bubble. That's USC going at Northwestern, at Purdue this week. 2 really huge opportunities for them to show if they're going to be a team that's really going to push for that field or not. I think this is a big week that'll tell us that. As for Michigan State, I don't think it does a whole lot, really. I think they were a team that was already in really strong positioning around a 3 or 4 seed line. It's a road loss to a team that's top 60 on KenPom. I think they're going to be just fine. I think their C is just fine. I still have them in protected seed range, and I think that they're still in very good shape, especially with what we've seen to date. It's their first Big Ten loss. They won their first 9. I think they've put themselves in the conversation of where you can feel pretty comfortable about how they play against just about everybody. They've won every game they've played at home this year. They're going to get 3 of their next 5 at home. I think you're going to keep seeing the Spartans be in pretty good shape.
All right, well, now that we've parsed out a lot of the chaos within the top 10 of the AP poll, at least, let's take a look now at our consensus number 1 seeds. And there's definitely been some movement since the last time we visited with you guys. You got Auburn, Alabama, Duke, and Tennessee, who obviously got the monster win over Florida at home by 20 points, holding the Gators to just 44 points. I was very impressed by Rick Barnes and what his group was able to put on tape. Lukas, we can stick with you. Talk to me a little bit about what is going on the 1 line right now. And clearly, Iowa State, who had established themselves as a player on that 1 line, dropping off after the rough loss to Kansas State.
Yeah, I mean, for starters, you start at the top with Auburn. I don't think there is more of a clear-cut number 1 seed than there can be than Auburn right now. They have more quad 1 wins than every other team in the country. They have more quad 1 wins than every team except Alabama has quad 1 and 2 wins combined. They rank top 3 in every single metric. It's an incredibly easy team right now that when we sit down as bracketologists, it's not hard to just pencil them in the top and kind of move on from there right now. I'll let Rocco talk about the middle section, but as for the last 1 seed, I put Tennessee as the benefactor to Iowa State losing over the weekend. Tennessee's top 6 in every single metric. They're on a loss outside quad 1. 4 of their wins are quad 1A. That's tied for 4th most in the country. And when you look at Iowa State losing and you look at the 2 seed line that was there coming into the weekend, Tennessee was the only one that won for most people. Like, I had Purdue on the 2 seed coming in and they stayed at the 2 seed line, but you saw Florida lose, Houston lost, and Iowa State lost. It's put itself in a position where Tennessee was really the team that was ready to take that jump back to the 1 seed line for a lot of people. Back to the 1 seed line for me, it's the first time they've been there in a while. I had Iowa State sitting there for quite some time, but Tennessee, I think, has given themselves the edge right now over a group of 2 seeds that are mostly coming off of losses right now, whether that be Houston, Florida, Purdue, and Iowa State. I think are still those teams that are still in the mix to potentially jump up to that 1 seed as soon as they can.
And Rocco, throwing things to you now for that middle section on our consensus 1 seeds. Obviously, Nate Oates has got a wagon once again in Tuscaloosa, and then Cooper Flagg and Duke continue to just keep plugging along in the ACC.
Absolutely. And I think, you guys wanted me to comment about the order. I would go Duke 2 still and Alabama 3. I definitely see the case for Alabama to move ahead of Duke just in terms of sheer quantity. So, of course, their 9 wins against the field is certainly better than Duke's 5, but they're getting way more opportunities in the SEC. And their high-end road win at Texas A&M and Kentucky are awesome wins. But I think Duke's win at Arizona was very tough to get, and I think the win at Louisville is strong enough. And I think if you want to, it's hard to compare 2 teams like this, right? Because one's getting a very sizable chunk of opportunities where Duke's getting limited opportunities in conference. And so, I think that's why they put some of these performance metrics on the sheet to help the committee. And I think when you look into the performance, like if you go to Ken Palmer Torvik right now and you actually look at the formula, not just what they're ranked, which I like to do, it's not even close. Duke's like plus 35.6 in their Ken Palm rating and Alabama's plus 27. They're 8 points clear of them. And it would probably take multiple losses for Duke to ever fall below Alabama on there. It just shows the level of talent and play that Duke is dominating with. And I feel like when you're seeding, especially if they're both going to be 1 seeds, that should probably win out because you should give them the better draw because there's a better chance they're going to dominate. But again, it's all new, so we don't really know for sure. And there's a case to be made for Alabama. And our good friend Greg Byrne, Alabama's athletic director, is on the committee, so you never know who he's taking out to lunch.
That is a fair point. And on the Duke front, Rocco, sticking with you, it is a big matchup this weekend. Going to Little John Coliseum and facing off against the Clemson Tigers. And you mentioned the limited opportunities for Duke in comparison to Alabama because of the league they play in. How important is it for Duke to show up and play well against Clemson, considering that's one of the only chances they have left for a quality win on their schedule?
Well, I mean, it's important for them to be like the second team overall. They would probably slip below Alabama maybe in a loss scenario. But at the end of the day, they'd still be a 1 seed. So I don't really know how important it is. It depends on your interpretation of that. I think if you're a 1 seed, even if you're the last 1 seed, it's just as good. You have just as good a chance to get to the Final Four. You might have to go west or something. That's about the only difference. But otherwise, if they want to stay in this position, it would help reinforce their spot at number 2, in my opinion. I think for Clemson, it's a huge day, obviously looking to secure their spot. So So yeah, I think one of the things Duke has over Alabama is they've only lost twice. Alabama's lost 3 times. So if they take a loss this week, that evens the score on that side of things. So you could look at it that way as well.
Yeah, definitely in agreement there. And looking around just the general 1 seed picture, Lukas, now coming to you. How far did Iowa State fall for you this past weekend following the loss to Kansas State?
I think Rocco said that they're his number 6 overall. They're my number 6 overall too. I don't think there's all that much separating the teams that I have on the 2 seed line right now. For me, that's Houston, Purdue, Florida, and Iowa State. I think they're all in a relatively similar standpoint. Iowa State's my 6. But I don't think that there's that much separating all those teams as it stands. I don't think they're in that much danger of falling to a 3. Based on our snapshot right now, I think you're going to see just about every bracketologist putting them on the 2 line today. And that's something that, as we talk about bracketology, it's our snapshot of where things are right now. And where they are right now, I think they're rock solidly on the 2 seed line.
And sticking with you, Lukas, is there anybody else we haven't mentioned yet that could potentially wiggle their way into this conversation to get onto the 1 line in the coming weeks?
I think we kind of continue to just kind of skate past Florida and Purdue as kind of these teams that are still kind of hanging around. Like if Florida had beaten Tennessee over the weekend, which clearly did not happen, but had that happened, like that was something that maybe we kind of see Florida jump from a team we didn't talk about really as a 1 seed contender to potentially having been there. Obviously they lost to Tennessee, but a loss to Tennessee also isn't something that really drastically changes their resume negatively all that much either. So I can see Florida still being in the mix. Purdue's up to the 3rd most quad 1 and 2 wins in the country. They only have 5 losses. They're top 10 in every single metric, all but 1 metric, actually. There's a shot for Purdue to get there, too. I think those are 2 teams that maybe even Texas A&M to some extent. They've kind of grown their way up towards that 3 line for me. There's some teams that I just think we haven't really talked about. But as of now, like the odds that a team knocks off Auburn, Alabama, or Duke from the 1 seed line seems so far stretched right now that I think it comes down to who can take that last spot, and Tennessee right now has that edge, and it really is just juggling for that 1 spot right now.
Yeah, definitely in agreement there, Lukas. And Rocco, throwing things back to you before we wrap up the first segment. How do you see kind of the outside looking in right now for the 1 seed picture, and how much did Marquette get negatively impacted this past weekend, dropping that game to UConn with a chance to bolster their resume against Dan Hurley's group?
Yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with what Lukas said. In terms of going for the 1 seed, it's pretty clear cut right now. Tennessee being the easy choice for the 4th number 1. Purdue, they keep pushing forward. I think that they with their Big Ten schedule ahead, certainly have a path to get there. Florida is just looking for another big win. They don't have a really strong road win quite yet. They don't even have a road win over the field. So they're a little light on just the big gold that they're trying to collect, but they have no bad at all. So, and their performances are dominant when they're humming. So Florida remains really interesting. And then Iowa State can get back, but they probably need some help because they, like I said earlier, they have that bad loss. And Houston's got the strength and the power. I don't think a 1-point loss at home kills their long-term path to a 1. And they're going to get a bunch of more chances in the Big 12. So Houston's still very much alive long term. It's going to take a few weeks, I think, before they can realistically get there, but there's enough runway for the Cougars. And then as far as Marquette goes, at this point, it's a little difficult to see a path all the way to a 1 now. The Big East, of course, your best wins you can get are UConn or St. John's, and everything else is, Creighton's decent as well. But it's difficult to see that now. They've taken on 4 losses so far. They do have the road win at Maryland, which is a nice road win. But I just think based on the performance average is close to 22nd in the country, which, again, their resume is much better than that. But that suggests that they're performing like a 6 seed and their resume is more like a 2 seed. So they have a lot of things they got to work on. They have to really start pummeling teams and get those big wins whenever they get to play UConn, St. John's, or Creighton again.
Yeah, good stuff as always from you, Rocco. We're going to take a quick break here on Fielding the 68, but first I want to tell you about our friends at Rhythm. Whether you're a seasoned bettor or aiming to dominate your college basketball betting, March Madness pool, NBA, golf, and more, Rhythm gives you the competitive edge. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. We're taking a quick break here on Fielding the 68, and on the other side, we're talking bubble, last 4 in and first 4 out coming up right after this.
Now that the college basketball season is in full swing, you need to make sure that you have access to the best betting tool on the market, the Rhythm app. Spelled RITHMN, is a data-backed app that uses AI and analytics to identify inefficiencies in betting lines and the player prop market that will allow you, the user, to profit. You can create customized, analytics-driven betting models tailored to your personal preferences as a bettor. Users have access to up-to-the-second against the spread data. And if you're like me and you understand pictures better than numbers on a screen, Rhythm's internal trend analysis provides you with the kind of graphs that will allow you to evaluate past results and project future performance in a visual way. Every Division I college basketball team is included in the Rhythm's metrics. Free subscribers to the Field of 68 Daily will get 25% off for a Rhythm subscription. Use the QR code on the screen to sign up or download at the link in the description.
We welcome you back into Fielding the 68, brought to you by our friends at Rhythm. It is time now for everybody's favorite portion of the show, which is Bubble Talk. Rocco, we're going to start with you on the last four in, and we're going to take a look at how you're seeing things right now at the NCAA tournament picture on the bubble. Talk us through your decision-making process to get to this last four in.
Well, it's the same every time, Faxon. You build out, I have about 18 to 22 categories I track, and then it's just basically filling it out for every bubble hopeful that's down here towards the bottom and comparing them. And so it always kind of surprises me the order it comes out in. But out of these four, BYU to me is the most safe. They got the road win at UCF, a quality road win, a team that I wasn't sure if they're going to make the field or not. They ended up not making the field for me, but they were super close. And in addition to that, BYU is 9-6 in meaningful games. They don't have any bad on their profile whatsoever. And everything else is pretty cookie cutter. And I really like them compared to the other options. So they're in. And then Wake Forest kind of surprised me. I wasn't sure if they were going to make the field or not. But again, you look at their 6 losses, all of them are in the first quadrant. They absolutely have no bad. They have a couple wins against the field now. I'm throwing Pittsburgh, as you can see on the screen, in the field. So that gives them a second win. If you add the Michigan win, which is quality down the road in Greensboro. But the cons of Wake Forest is they're 5-6 in their 11 hardest games. So you got to dip into the third quadrant to get to that 10-6 meaningful record. But again, all things considered, there's not really anything bad yet, and you can safely put them in the field. With Georgia, another team that obviously they're solid. They've got big home wins, which is good, but away wins are what really move the needle. And they really have nothing except for the road win at Georgia Tech. Of course, Georgia Tech's big Louisville win made that a little bit more relevant, putting that into the second quadrant. But Georgia, I'd really like to see get a road win. If we had better options, I probably would have pushed Georgia out. But I did think they were good enough for today to leave in. And then Pittsburgh, similar as well. I guess the good with Pittsburgh is they have a road win at Ohio State, and the Syracuse one matters for something in the second quadrant. They also haven't done a whole lot wrong. If you watch these teams, eye test, all that stuff, I did like Pittsburgh a little bit better than the other options. But I was holding my nose, honestly, on those last two. But they're making it in for today, Faxon.
Yeah, and definitely a lot of teams jam-packed in there like sardines right around the bubble right now. And then obviously with Wake Forest and Pitt playing each other this past week, Wake able to jump over Pitt a little bit after getting a win at home. We know they're really good at home. They've always been really good at home under Forbes. The problem is, can they get those wins away from home, as you're alluding to, down the stretch to play their way in to the NCAA tournament picture? Lukas, now coming to you. Talk to us a little bit about how you're seeing the last four in.
Yeah, pretty similar group for me right now. My last four ends: Nebraska, Georgia, BYU, and Pittsburgh. Nebraska's the team we haven't mentioned yet. I have a feeling that's because Rocco probably has them a little higher. It feels early to say a bubble team had an outstanding week, but home win over Illinois, road win over Oregon, kind of just what Nebraska needed after a 6-game losing streak. They're up to top 50 in every metric. They don't have a quad 3 or quad 4 loss, 3 quad 1A wins. Most only have 1 at this point. They're 3-5 in those games. I think that carries legit weight. They put themselves back onto the right side of the cut line for me. Rocco already talked about Georgia, BYU, and Pitt. But for me, the thing with Georgia, they're 1-5 over the last 6 games, and that's where I think recency kind of gets overlooked sometimes. It gets over talked about sometimes. is they're 1-5. 4 of those losses have been to at least, at worst, 2 seeds. They've lost to Tennessee, Auburn, Florida, and Alabama. 4 of the 5 losses on this stretch are on the road. Their only home loss over the stretch was by 2 to the number 1 overall seed in Auburn. It's been a tough stretch just because the schedule's been such a tough stretch. And when you look back, the thing with Georgia is they have a lot of losses to top-end teams, and that's really where it puts them. They're 2-7 in Quad 1 games, 1-6 in Quad 1A, but the fact that they really have no bad losses keeps them on the right side. For BYU, I think that Rocco's on it. That BYU is the team that I kind of feel the most comfortable about long-term. They have the best quality metrics of any team that's really on the bubble right now. They've moved themselves up into really their top 31 across the board in every single quality metric. They're a team that I feel pretty confident continuing to rise as they go forward. That said, as far as where they stand right now, they don't have a win over a projected top 7 seed. So a home game against Arizona that comes up this week is a big one for where they can kind of take a jump from a bubble team into a little bit more safer projections. As for Pitt, pretty similar to Georgia, and they don't really have bad losses, but they don't really have those top end quality wins. I think my concern with Pitt is that, they don't have, I don't say recency plays a factor in this. They don't have a win over a tournament team since November 29th. And for now, they only have one more opportunity to add one. That's March 1st at Louisville. So I think with Pittsburgh, just with the schedule they have left, I think that they're in a spot where they can't really afford as many L's as some other teams that have tougher schedules down the stretch. They have less of a margin for error just because they need to take care of business in those games.
Yeah, got to avoid the ACC landmines. That continues to be a frequent theme here on the program. And for Pitt, that's going to be imperative down the stretch as we shift gears and now take a look at our consensus last 4 in, so how everybody in the panel is viewing it. We've got Georgia, BYU, Pitt, and Ohio State, who's a little bit of an interesting case study as well. Lukas, we can stick with you. Obviously, 3 of these names were featured in both of you guys' lists. But what are your thoughts as of right now on Ohio State and the Buckeyes?
Well, I'm actually higher on Ohio State than that group, than how they got to this point. I still have them as my last 10 seed coming into today. I think if you're going to look at a team that can have a wide range of outcomes, it's Ohio State. Because when you look at, I know Rocco points out his meaningful games metric fairly often, and that's where they're 7-9. They're under 500. They haven't played a quad 3 game all year. If you're under 500 in meaningful games, where does that really put you? I think is a reasonable question. But they do have that road win over Purdue, and as Rocco indicates, road wins are gold, and a neutral site win over Kentucky doesn't hurt either. So I still have the Buckeyes on the right side of things because their quality wins are really quite quality. 3-5 in quadrant 1A on the year, 7 wins across the upper 2 quadrants is pretty good relative to the rest of the bubble. Plus their metrics are in relatively good shape still, especially on the quality side. They're 26th in KenPom, 30th in BPI. I think they're a team that's still on the right side, but they're one that, even if I would have them as a 9 seed or a 10 seed today based on their quality of wins, currently I have them as a 10, even then they're a team that I would not feel confident about if Selection Sunday was today because of that 7-9 record against the upper 3 quadrants. That's something I usually frown upon, and that's certainly something to be worried about.
Rocco, where's your head at as of right now on Ohio State, who seems to be one of the more polarizing teams in the bubble picture?
Yeah, Lukas knows me too well. So, yeah, that's right where I'm at. 7-9 is a non-starter for me, mainly because of what the committee's told us over the years. If the actual season ended today, which is how I treat the exercise, I don't think they would have much of a case to get in based on where we've been since the quads were introduced. You saw the 3 Big East teams all get left out last year with sub-500 records in the same category. Whether you want to look at Seton Hall, St. John's, or Providence, they all got left out. And I think Seton Hall was only 1 under 500. Even Oklahoma at 500 got left out last year. Obviously, we had bid steals, so it's not an apples to apples. But in Ohio State's case, they have 9 regular season games left. I think they're mostly reasonable. Some winnable home games for sure. They end at Indiana. There's a really good – I like Ohio State. So if Buckeye fans, I saw a couple online today get after me a little bit. That's cool. The bottom line is if they handle their business from here, they'll easily be back in. And as you saw in my forecast on Friday, they were still 1 below 500. But I agree with Lukas. The weight of those wins against Kentucky on a neutral court and at Purdue are really big for them because once they're selected, they will skyrocket up the seed list. So that's why they're so polarizing. They were a safe 10 seed for me after selection. last Friday, but today they're not even selectable. So it's that's the difference. So I would say if you're an Ohio State fan, yep, go ahead.
I want to pose a question back at you, Rocco, on this, and that's Ohio State's 7-9 against the upper three quadrants, but all of those games are in quadrant 1 and 2. I just want to hear your opinion on what your differential there is between 7-9 all in quad 1-2 versus UCF, who's 8-8 against the upper three quadrants, but 5 of those wins are in quad 3.
Yeah, no doubt. No, I think it definitely helps Ohio State, and that's why I made the exception when they were 7-8. Just one game under 500, plus all of them being in the top 2. But once you're 2 under, I think it's kind of a non-starter, like I said. And we'll see. That's
UCF
just what
would have to go 4-1 for UCF to match Ohio State's record in quad 1 and 2. They'd have to go 4-1 in the next 5 quad 1-2 games.
Correct, but the fact that they've got some beef in quad 3, it's not meaningless.
Okay.
So
sure,
it's they have to fix. I have UCF out. That's a spoiler, but I have UCF out as well.
I missed that. They're my first team out, so spoiler there too.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll get into UCF in a second, but yeah, like I think they're both problematic. So they're both on the wrong side right now from where I'm sitting. Yep.
All right, let's go ahead and throw to Lukas for some first 4 out talk to avoid any more spoilers here. Lukas, talk to us a little bit about UCF and the rest of the teams that you've got sitting in this category right here of your first 4 out.
I totally misremembered your last 4 in already, Rocco. I thought UCF was one of those teams. UCF is my first 4 out. UCF is my first team out, followed by Arizona State, SMU, and Wake Forest. Kind of a collection of teams that just doesn't really have quality wins at this point in the year. Like UCF has a few at the top, but they're just they're 0-2 in quadrant 2. They're 3-8 in quadrant 1, but like outside of that, they haven't done a whole lot. You look at Arizona State. I'm not saying they don't have quality wins. They've got wins over New Mexico, St. Mary's, West Virginia that are over the field. But I think they're a team that's in an interesting spot in terms of leverage losses. Like if you look at teams that are projected 8 seeds or worse right now, Arizona State's lost to 4 of them. That's Gonzaga, Baylor, BYU, and UCF. So if you're going to do a 1-to-1 bubble comparison, in a lot of cases that doesn't look very, very great to Arizona State. They're respectable 6-9 in quads 1 and 2. That's more wins than most in this area, but they don't have any metrics in the top 45. SMU is just I think they're the team that just kind of stays in the first 4 out, next 4 out, kind of as the season progresses. They're 17-2 outside of quadrant 1. They're top 46 in just about every metric, but they're 0-3 in quad 1. They don't have a quad 1 win. Until they get that, they're probably going to stay right here unless they drop a landmine game. And as far as if they can get into the field, you look at what they have left for opportunities to get into quadrant 1. They have a home game against Clemson. That's net 30. That is on the edge of being a quadrant 1 game. And they have a road game at Stanford, who's net 72, which is a little bit further from the edge, but not much. Those are their current remaining opportunities. That puts them in a tough spot. Wake Forest, really quality resume metrics, pretty poor quality metrics overall. They're sub 60 on average in quality metrics. They're sub 75 in 2 of the 3. They have some hurdles to climb, and I think that the thing for them projecting forward is those missed opportunities against Duke and Louisville are going to hurt because there just aren't that many opportunities left in that league.
And Rocco, throwing things to you now and how you're shaping up for the first 4 out. Obviously, you got a front row seat to what was going on in Tempe this past weekend. And while we know where Bobby Hurley is going to be voting or not voting for Big 12 or all Big 12, how are you shaping up for the Sun Devils and the rest of your first 4 out?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on them a little earlier. Faxon, Arizona State, I think with the 9 losses now, it's just a little out of bounds. A little bit of the bad outweighing the good, but I do like the way that their St. Mary's win is aging. Of course, St. Mary's on fire. New Mexico's in first place in the Mountain West. They got to win over them. They have the road Morgantown win, but they're just taking on a little too much water with the 9 losses. And, that's another point on Ohio State. Arizona State and Ohio State, 9 losses. They're both there. Nobody else has more than, I think, 8 in my field, and that would be Nebraska. So, again, that for this point in time, it's a snapshot in time. It's all going to change again by Friday. It just makes it a little easier because there's a lot of losing going on, and we're not trying to put losers into the tournament. And so that's another way to sum it up. UCF, much like we talked about, they're 3-8 in their 11 difficult games, and it's just not good enough. The one good thing for UCF is that Texas Tech win on the road is freaking awesome. way more awesome than it's ever been. So if they can just add some more substance, get some meat on the bone, if you will, Faxon, we might see the Knights back in there pretty comfortably again. And then with SMU, similar to what Lukas was saying, I actually was very tempted to put them in because I do have respect for what they're doing. It's not easy. They're 5-5 in their 10 hardest, but obviously 1-5 in their 6 hardest, and they don't have a win against the field. They'll definitely need to handle that Clemson game at home when it comes up. Sorry, Faxon, but that's what they need. And they've already got some decent road with NC State and Virginia. It's not much. It matters a little bit. But I think if they accumulated like 4 or 5 of those level, like including the Stanford road game that Lukas mentioned, you can make a case for them. But we've seen a team from a power conference not be able to get that win, that win against the field or a road win against the top 80 or whatever it is, really struggle to get in. So it's just hard. There's not enough evidence to put the stamp on SMU, but I really appreciate the way they're playing in these games they have to handle because they have not lost one of them.
Yeah, and the Mustangs have definitely been impressive and maybe even a little bit of a surprise this year within the ACC. And selfishly, I'll be hoping that Clemson can handle business on the road in that one, Rocco, obviously. But that does feel like a must-win, if you will, for SMU to bolster their resume. Let's take a look now at our consensus first 4 out to kind of see where everybody else is stacking up. And obviously, some pretty common names and some pretty common teams here with Wake Forest, UCF, Arizona State, and SMU that we have covered. And yeah, Lukas, there you go. Just kind of ripping off your 4 and maybe a little bit different of an order. But in totality, it feels like everyone's pretty aligned with what the bubble picture looks like right now. There are certain bracketologists that are going to prefer certain teams because of certain metrics. But Lukas, it feels like we have a lot of unity right now across the front of what the bubble picture looks like.
Yeah, I think for me, I got to a point. Obviously, we stop at first 4 out for this show, but I got to a point for me today where I got to the first 9 teams out, and then there was a pretty significant gap from that point forward. And usually, I feel like at this point in the year, my list of teams I'm strongly considering is a little bit larger than this, and I think that goes to show our how close we are as a collective right now in the bubble is because I think there's just less teams that are really in that conversation. You look even more towards those next 4 out kind of teams. Like a couple of those for me, like USC is my 6th team out, Arkansas is my 8th team out. Those are teams that we're talking about as being like teams that are on the rise. Like those are teams that aren't really quite towards the field yet, but we're hoping can push their way towards that. So like when you take that into consideration, like you're down to only about 6 or 7 teams that you feel like are on the outside looking in that really you could have made an argument for today. And I think that makes it a lot closer, and we're going to have a lot more similarities right now because of just how small the bubble has gotten at this point in the year. Now, the odds that bubble teams lose and teams that are further out win over the next couple weeks, and that elongates what's in the bubble conversation is certainly a factor and something that can happen. For right now, I think the pool's smaller than it normally is at this point in the year, so I think you're seeing more similarities due to that.
And Rocco, your thoughts on kind of that next 4 out contention and maybe teams that are on the outside looking in as of right now?
Yeah, well, I kind of look at it a little bit on the flip side of what Lukas did. Out of the pool of teams, there's a lot of teams that could still emerge based on remaining schedules. In politics, I think they call it the October surprise. In NCAA basketball, we typically have a February surprise. And so somebody's going to come from the ashes that aren't really being discussed. USC and Arkansas are obvious contenders right now, so is Xavier, but there could be completely somebody else if they just get hot and win like 5-6 in a row, and it'll be a surprise to everybody, but it seems to be 1 or 2 every year. And on the flip side, teams that are in right now, I'm still struggling with the SEC actually getting 13 teams. I'm even struggling with them getting 12. And Vanderbilt they're like my top 11 seed, and I could see the committee even leaving them out now because they have a 331 non-conference strength of schedule. You also know how close Georgia is to the bubble, and Texas and Oklahoma aren't exactly safe quite yet. They're getting stronger. Texas was like one of the last teams in last week, so they're just a small losing streak away from being in danger themselves. So I do feel like eventually the SEC might dwindle down to 11. And that would open up a couple spots. So there's just multiple ways to think about it overall.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how everything shakes out with Vandy specifically. They're up 4 at half on the road in Norman, and then minus 34 in the second half and conceded a 21-0 run to start that second half. I was watching the game wondering what in the world was going on. I've been pretty impressed with what they've been able to do this year up in Nashville, but that was definitely a little bit of a head scratcher and a resume blow this weekend for Vanderbilt. We got to take a quick break here on the program. And real quick, I want to tell you guys about our friends at Rhythm. You can access expert-backed predictions for every remaining college basketball game, from rivalries to sleeper matchups. Rocco mentioned that February surprise. If you want to be on top of who that's going to be, go with the folks at Rhythm. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. The final segment of Fielding the 68 on the other side of a short break, where we're going to be recapping the chaotic weekend in college basketball. Stick with us.
If you haven't heard by now, we have partnered with BetMGM for the season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using the bonus code FIELD. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you'll receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets. Go download the BetMGM app and use the code FIELD today.
We welcome you back into Fielding the 68, brought to you by Rhythm. It's time now for a deep dive into some matchups that were really crucial this weekend for how things are shaking out as of right now on both the 1 seed line, the bubble line, and just in general for the NCAA tournament picture. Rocco, we can start with you here, and we mentioned it briefly at the beginning of the program. The Texas Tech-Houston matchup was very tantalizing, and Red Raiders able to go on the road and get a win. It felt like a massive resume boost for them.
No doubt. Yeah. I mean, because of the combination of that win, and really nobody wins at Houston. It's just something that doesn't happen. So to be able to get that win, from a committee standpoint, I feel like that gets discussed in the committee about just how hard that win was. And going into altitude and beating a tournament level BYU team, they might be the only team that's won there this year so far. That's super unique. So they've got 3 high-end wins with the Arizona win at home included in that mix, and they've only lost 4 games all year. I think the thing you hold your nose at is the 296 non-conference strength of schedule, but they've already proven they can play with the big boys, and they have an awesome, perfect on the road, 5-0, 6-2 in road neutral games. So for the Red Raiders, there's so much going for them. I know you could pick apart the loss to St. Joe's and the home loss to UCF, but right now it's kind of all about upside. And I just feel like compared to like a Michigan State or maybe even arguably a Kansas, their resumes are kind of stale compared to what the Red Raiders are bringing to the table. And that's why I pushed them all the way up to a 3 seed today. It's just there's so much weight at the top of the resume for them. On the Houston side, like I said earlier, they're still very dangerous. They're still one of the top 3 metrics teams by a mile. They lost by 1 point. They lost their games in Vegas by overtime or barely as well. So when teams are beating Houston, they're doing it by their chinny chin chins, right? So it's like the Cougars are still brutal, and they still have a good schedule ahead. If they can handle their business and play how they play and just get a big win streak going, I still think the 1 line is in play for them.
Lukas, talk to me a little bit about what you're viewing for Houston, and Rocco briefly alluded to the fact that they're still in play for the 1 line. Can they play their way up to that status level by potentially running the table?
Yeah, I think for sure. I think something that obviously Rocco and I look at this a lot, but like even to some extent, I still kind of get caught up in like, this isn't the Houston of 2 years ago. This isn't like you lost a game in early February, but it's the rest of the American schedule that looms. Like they lost a game in early February, and they still get Baylor at home, Arizona on the road, Arizona State on the road, Iowa State at home, Texas Tech on the road, Kansas at home, Baylor on the road. Like there are so many opportunities for Houston to continue to pile up high quality wins, because like right now, that's really all that's lacking in terms of reaching the 1 seed line. It's not like they're going to improve their quality metrics to a point where we're going to be like, oh, they have to be there. They're already at that point. Like they're number 1 in BPI, they're number 1 in T rank, they're 3rd in KenPom. That's not going to get any really better than it is right now. That's as good as it can be. Like if they have the best metric average of quality metrics in the country. It's slightly higher than Auburn right now. Like really the key for them is if they can pick up those wins, and there's so many opportunities for them to do so and get their resume metrics up from what are currently 10th and 11th in the country, and get their quad 1 wins, which are currently at 3, which is I think the lowest among the top 23 on KenPom, unless it's Gonzaga, in the country. So I think that's where kind of they're lacking in terms of reaching the 1 seed conversation, and there's just ample opportunities for them to pick those up, and if they do, they'll get there.
And sticking with the theme of ample opportunities, a couple SEC matchups to hit here real quickly that obviously played big-time impacts. And we mentioned in the first segment of the show, maybe one of the biggest losers of the weekend in Mississippi State. Lukas, sticking with you here, what did that do to the Bulldogs' resume with kind of an unanticipated result at home where they're usually really good?
It's also 2 straight losses at home and 3 of their last 4 losses. 3 of their last 4 games at home have been losses. That's Kentucky, Alabama, and Missouri. Their only win in that stretch at home was over Mississippi, and it took overtime to get there. They've certainly just been struggling over the last few weeks, and that's put them in a difficult spot. Their metric average is now sub 30 in all 3 quality metrics. They're 8-6 in the upper 2 quadrants, which is good, but not one that really separates them from other teams. Like you look at when you talk about where Mississippi State has been as a projected like 3 to 5 seed. You compare that with some teams. 8-6 in quads 1 and 2 doesn't really differentiate that much from a UConn who's 8-5, or from a Clemson who's 8-4, UCLA 8-6, and those are teams that we haven't really talked about as high as 4 or 5 seeds. So they've definitely put themselves more towards that out of projected seed range and more towards safe, but not in that projected seed area. Somewhere in that 6 to 7 seed range for Mississippi State right now, which is certainly a blow compared to where they were as early as 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, definitely an agreement there. And Rocco, talk to me a little bit about what happened this weekend in Starkville.
It was a beatdown. Faxon. Missouri's playing so well. Beautiful basketball to watch. They're playing together, cohesive. Reminds me of a good mid-major team right now, except for just more talented and way more NIL. But in general, with Mizzou, like I said earlier, they worked their way up to the 5 line, and then you turn around on Wednesday this week, they go to Tennessee. So if they can win in Knoxville as well, like I'm pretty sure they'll be a protected seed by Friday. So their trajectory is straight up. But I think overall, what their resume lacks still is just a collection of more road work. They're 2-4 road neutral. The 2 wins are massive at Florida, at Mississippi State. But in the SEC, the beat goes on, and you got to keep playing big games. So their next 5 in a row are still against teams in the field with Tennessee, A&M, Oklahoma, Georgia, Alabama. But they get 3 of those 5 at home. They're playing extremely well. So the sky's the limit there. And on Mississippi State's end, Faxon, it's pretty interesting because 4 of their next 6 are on the road, and all of them are against tournament-level teams, including going to Georgia this Saturday. At least they get a week off to recover. They'll have the bye for the midweek this week. But they'll have a lot to work on in terms of what went wrong on Saturday. And, in general, they're obviously safe. They just kind of played their way out of that protected seed discussion. But if they get a couple of these road wins out of the next 6, they're right back in there.
And Rocco, sticking with you, it's been a unique year for the West Coast Conference with St. Mary's being the king of the league, and obviously there's a little more depth and quality than there typically is. Talk to me a little bit about what you saw from St. Mary's and Gonzaga this past weekend.
St. Mary's did a great job controlling the pace, and they made Gonzaga play their game, and it ultimately paid off in the end. That game was very low scoring for a Gonzaga game. St. Mary's always the most prepared team in the entire West Coast. Nobody's more prepared than the Gales, and it pays off once again. I had their game last week against Santa Clara. They went on a 30-0 run. They're just humming at the right time. They got Paulus Morauskas is playing much better. And as a resume, now they're in an interesting boat because they've only got the one win against Gonzaga. That's a field level win. But they've obviously played a pretty good schedule, top 100 schedule overall. They're 2-1 at the top. Their performance stuff is going through the roof. They're 22nd overall in performance, according to the net at least. So they're a difficult team to kind of seed, but they've done it's the same movie every year. It feels like 4 years in a row where they're just constantly climbing through January and February while a lot of teams fall. And like you said, the WCC is so much more beefy than ever. So that's going to allow them to go to San Francisco this Thursday and pick up another quality win if they can get that, and go to Oregon State on a tight turn. And Oregon State team has been very good at home on Saturday. So it's a big week for St. Mary's ahead. And they still get Santa Clara at home. They get Gonzaga on the road and another Oregon State game at the end. So instead of this playing bottom level WCC teams like we've seen in other years, they actually have like 5 or 6 more meaningful games coming up.
Yeah, and Lukas, now throwing to you. WCC bringing some quality to the table, and it's helping all the top dogs in the league for their standing headed towards the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, honestly, I think St. Mary's might have been one of the biggest winners of the entire last week. A win at Santa Clara isn't something to really overlook. The win at home against Gonzaga is certainly something to their name. But I think you're also seeing that their non-conference schedule is coming together in a way that's starting to help them a lot. That they have a win over USC, who's obviously beat Illinois, Nebraska, and Michigan State all recently. They have a win over Nebraska, who had one of the best weeks in the country, also winning at home against Illinois and at Oregon. Those are the 2 highlights of their non-conference schedule in terms of wins. But even the ones that are kind of like the ones you kind of overlook sometimes, and that's they beat Towson, who's now 9-1 in the CAA. They beat Chattanooga, who's 7-3 in the SoCon. Like they've really picked up some. Merrimack's up to 7-3. They beat Akron, who's the favorite to go win the MAC. They're 9-0. Like they've had some of these mid-major wins that they've picked up are really gathering some really solid momentum for them. As I think that this is really where St. Mary's thrives, I think, as a resume, not just this season, but I think what they've done in recent years in terms of scheduling, they kind of gets you to February, and then you start thinking about, man, they didn't just play like some good mid-majors. They played some mid-majors that are really going to be tournament teams and teams that we're going to be talking about in March as ones that you probably don't want to see in the NCAA tournament. And maybe St. Mary's can avoid having to play those teams again.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Lukas. And I feel like a lot of people might be sleeping on that as well. And there is something to be said about beating quality mid-majors that are going to have a good chance to beat their league. So St. Mary's continuing to have a resume that's aging well with the non-con, if you will. And sticking with you, Lukas, because you mentioned this earlier, they're calling it Nebraska ball, and they played their way right back onto the bubble with maybe the best week we've seen from them all season. Talk to me a little bit about the Cornhuskers, and then on the inverse, an Oregon team that's in a little bit of decline right now.
You know, I'll talk about Oregon first because I think I heard Rocco mention earlier that he has Nebraska up to an 8 line. So I think that he's going to be a bigger Nebraska. Okay, then I'm off on that.
A 10 seed, just for clarification.
Okay, so yeah, I am on the 10. I am on as an 11 right now. I thought you said an 8 line. Never mind. Ignore. But with that said, like I think for Nebraska, then I think that they're a team that obviously we've talked about on a few times on this show so far, and that's with a really, really great week that they just put forth. And I think they're now coming into a stretch here that they can kind of solidify themselves as a tournament team. They go at Washington, and then they get 2 really nice home game opportunities against Ohio State and Maryland, who are tournament teams at home. And I think that those are games that they can really pick up. If you now go through a 5-game stretch here where you can win 4 games over tournament teams and pick up a road win, which would be the Washington game in there, I think this is the stretch of the season where Nebraska can go from what was on the wrong side of the cut line a week ago to one that's pretty safely in single digits if they play up to their potential over these next 10 or so days with Washington, Ohio State, and Maryland.
Yeah, and Rocco, throwing it to you now. You've got Nebraska on the 10 line. Talk to me a little bit about the Cornhuskers, and then on the inverse, the Ducks, who have struggled a little bit as of late.
No doubt. Yeah, so Nebraska's playing the same game as Ohio State right now, in my view. They're 8-8 in meaningful games, so they're very selectable. And then when you compare them to the bubble, they're very strong because they have a road win at Creighton with the road win last night against Oregon. So 2 terrific road wins. And then they beat Illinois and UCLA at home already, 2 also teams wearing white on our brackets right now for the first round. So it's those are 4 really quality wins, and most of the bubble I can't even see anybody else on my chart in the bubble picture that has that many. So that alone got my respect. And then I think you start comparing them to most, and they're winning the comparison battles. So that got them up to a 10 seed and away from Dayton. But I think the larger point is at 8-8, any result could throw them, any negative result could throw them under 500. Then they're teeter-tottering that line, and their wins are good. So they would still probably be considered with an 8-9 record, but that would have to be reevaluated now that they have the 2 quality road wins. So they're certainly not safe. They've got to continue to at least go 500 from here. Ideally, if you're the Cornhuskers, you just don't worry about that and win a bunch of more games. On the Oregon side, yeah, they've really been stumbling lately. One of the interesting things about the Ducks' resume is the fact that they beat Alabama, Texas A&M, San Diego State, all for money. But they count just the same. And they have 4 high-end quality wins overall and a really strong top quadrant record of 8-4. Most of their blemishes have been at home. So when you just compare road results, they're awesome. They're like 8-2 road neutral. So the resume is still holding up really well despite the home blunders. And obviously getting blown out at UCLA is a bad sign overall basketball-wise. They have a brutal week coming up to the Michigan schools on the road. So we'll see what things look like by the end of this week. But for now, they barely held on as a 5 seed. But they could free fall if they get swept this week and continue to play the way they have been playing.
Yeah, I think those are some very quality points, Rocco. And before we go around the horn and talk about games to watch throughout the course of the week, the last key matchup that had implications, and Rocco, you briefly hit on it as well, and we briefly hit on it in the last segment, the Vanderbilt game and the Oklahoma game. Where are you at right now as somebody that has openly stated earlier that you're having difficulty getting it to 13 or even 12 SEC teams? These feel like 2 teams that are like right on that line. So talk to me a little bit about the Sooners and the Commodores and how everything's shaken out with those 2 teams.
So for the Sooners, it's kind of a nice blessing that they're getting a big win because they were the team that won the battle for Atlantis. So they've got the Louisville, Arizona, Michigan, all great wins out of conference. They started conference play, I think 1-4, and it was getting dicey. But now they're starting to find their footing in the league. Yep. That turnaround, you mentioned it, outscoring Vanderbilt by 34 to win by 30. That's a really good sign. They're clearly a safe team and out of the bubble picture for right now. Obviously, any loss could change that. But 9-5 in their meaningful games, 6-3 road neutral, but they're just 1-3 in their big road games. So they're going to need to win a couple more on the road to secure their place eventually. But for today, they're rock solid. They're my last number 8 seed. For Vanderbilt, like I said, they are coming in as an 11 seed. And the committee, this might be the team the committee would be stuck on because they're 331st ranked non-conference strength of schedule. Typically, depending on how close the committee would have them to the bubble, it could be a de facto see you later. So they're already at risk because of the way they scheduled. I get it. Brand new coach, got to get some W's, all that stuff. But it's hurting them right now. And then they have the 2 big wins at home, Tennessee and Kentucky. We love those. But eventually it's about who did you play, where did you play, and how did you do. They're going to need a tournament level win on the road in this league. They've got the LSU road win, which is better than nothing. But they want to supplement that with an extra road win or 2 as we go. Otherwise, they only have 5 losses on the year. That's why I had a hard time just throwing them out completely right now. And honestly, I like watching them play besides that second half on Saturday. But I've liked them play the way they built their roster. They have a lot of veterans. I think they start all seniors. So we'll see how it plays out from here. But those are the things they need to be concerned about.
Yeah, Coach Bylinson's done a great job in year 1 in Nashville, and Hoggard and Nickel and all those pieces that have been able to kind of gel together. They are a fun watch. They're a good team. They've been good consistently. But Rocco, as I know better than anyone else because of what happened to my team 2 years ago, that non-conference strength of schedule can bite you in the butt come Selection Sunday. So got to make sure that they're staying on par with that. Lukas, anything to add on Vanderbilt before we go around the horn and take a look at games to watch?
Yeah, I think Rocco said that they only have 5 losses so far this year. And to that point, I mentioned earlier Georgia was in its welcome to hell part of schedule. Vanderbilt's heading into that welcome to hell part of the schedule. They go at Florida, Texas at home, Auburn at home, Tennessee on the road. That's for Texas at home being the easy game out of the next four is pretty absurd. They play 3 of the top 5 KenPom teams in the next 12 days. It's going to be a hard time keeping that loss column to just 5 or even 6 or even 7 over this stretch. They're a team that could really there's obviously plenty of opportunity to make a huge jump over this stretch, but odds are that we're looking at Vanderbilt in a couple weeks thinking, okay, they're still right at this bubble spot and maybe even have some work to do going into a stretch that follows this murderous stretch. Even then, they get 4 straight KenPom top 25 teams.
Yeah, they're getting thrown to the ringer, and it feels like every SEC team.
Vandy doesn't play a team outside of the KenPom in the entire month of February.
I don't even know how that's possible. That it sounds fake, but I know it's the truth. That's absolutely ridiculous. So,
sorry. I guess the Oklahoma game on Saturday was February 1st. Okay, 35th. They don't play a single game for between February 2nd and March 4th against the team outside of the KenPom top 30.
Yeah, that is absolutely insane. Hug your Commodore fans if you know any of them. Send some prayers, fruit basket maybe, because it could be a long month. But on the flip side, ample opportunity to get some quality wins if they can forge in the right direction and bounce back from what happened in Norman. We'll stick with you, Lukas, before we go back to Rocco and wrap up here. Around the horn, some games to watch over the course of this week.
Yeah, I think the one that the team I'm most interested in this week is St. John's. You look at a resume that obviously there's a lot to like about being 19-3. They're a Big East team. They're 10-1 in the Big East, but they don't really have a whole lot in terms of quality wins this season. New Mexico at home is maybe the best thing they really have going for them right now. And then they come into a week this week where they get Marquette at home and UConn on the road. I mean, this is a team that could really, if they find a way to go 2-0 this week, we're all of a sudden really quickly talking about protected seed. They're a team I'm very interested in seeing what they can do against the tougher level competition that they haven't necessarily faced to this point. They've done a tremendous job against mid-level teams to this point, but this week's going to be a big test in terms of what they can really bring at the top level.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here as well. So we wanted to talk about Arkansas pre-show, so I'm just going to jump in on the Hogs real quick. For their schedule this week, they go to Texas and they host Alabama. So like everybody else in the SEC, brutal but awesome opportunities, and Arkansas needs the opportunities being behind the 8 ball. Right now, I think it's pretty simple when you're in a league this big. You're 6-8 against meaningful competition so far. They obviously have the great win at Kentucky, the win over Michigan, and a Georgia home win. So there's some stuff to build with right now. Just the sheer math, they have 10 regular season games to go. If they can get to 6-4 in those 10, easier said than done. These are some brutal games they have coming up. And then go win a game at the SEC tournament and lose one. Then they finish right at 500, 13-13 in their meaningful games. I guess that's what they need to do based on some basic math. But if they pick up a road Auburn win, something absolutely extraordinary, I guess that's the one they can get that would move the needle big time. Maybe they don't have to win that many games. So Arkansas has plenty of opportunities. Going 6-4 is not like a Herculean task, but in this league, maybe it is. So we'll see how it plays out, but they're still alive.
Yeah, you talk about teams that can really make their way up towards the field this week. You talk Arkansas, USC's in the same boat. They get Purdue on the road. So as you're going to gear up for this next week of action, Arkansas, USC, maybe some teams to watch. Obviously, a bunch of great hoops coming down the stretch of this season, starting with some really good matchups this week. And as always, thanks for joining us on Fielding the 68. Really excited about the great show presented by Rhythm today. We'll be back on Friday with another show. Plenty of action before then to see if we get some shifts in the bracket.